I bet many of you, whether you're religious or not, are familiar with the story of Job. Job is a character from the Bible, specifically from the Old Testament, and he is famous or infamous for being the guy who was put through fire and tribulation and essentially on a life trial by God to prove his faith in God. And it's meant to be a lesson to the believers in God. It's meant to be a lesson to humanity that God works in mysterious ways. If you're not familiar with the story, in a nutshell, it's basically like this. Job has a pretty good life, and then Satan challenges God and says to God, look, I bet if you make Job's life miserable and ruin his life and take everything away, he'll lose faith in you, etc., etc. And so God takes the wager and he does just that. And he basically takes everything that Job had away from him. He suffers a great deal, loses his family, loses his wealth. He is in a state of complete misery. And the point of it is basically to prove that mere mortals cannot ever question the wisdom of God. And in the end, of course, he's rewarded because he stuck to his faith. And Satan, of course, is thwarted by this. But the lesson to be taken home here is that we mere mortals should not question the wisdom of God. If bad things happen to us, it is not for reasons we can comprehend, but we need to have faith in God nonetheless. Now, the implication of the story is that good things happen to good people and bad things happen to bad people, but God is trying to show that that's not the case. God does what God wills, and you just need to kind of deal with it, essentially. And as many of you might be inclined to believe, I don't believe a lick of this. I think it's a bunch of nonsense. No, in real life, outside of the Bible, outside of fantastical religious visions and claims, bad things happen to bad people, good things happen to good people, good things happen to bad people, bad things happen to good people. And there is no rhyme or reason. In fact, it's very, very likely that this story about Job emerged to sort of justify and explain the suffering of man. In fact, it's almost certainly the case. Because that's the problem with real life. The longer you live, the harder it is to resist certain things that you might encounter in life, which then lead to an overt feeling of cynicism, which is basically what I'm going to be talking about in this video. You see, we've all heard the cult of positivity before. The cries of just be positive, bro. And it is true. We are living in a kind of toxic positive environment. But there's another aspect to this I want to cover, somebody who is no longer young and quite far away from being young. And that is basically life throwing curveballs at you. Life beating you down again and again and again. It's effectively an extension of the Matthew effect. But as you get older and older, it's more likely to happen. People die, you fall ill, bad things just happen. And I think it would take either a Herculean effort or the mind of a madman, or perhaps somebody who's just genetically so gifted that none of this stuff actually bothers him. And the more you live, the longer you live, very frequently, the worse the things are that happen to you. And as a result of that, you develop a sense of cynicism. Now, I know a guy, for example, in his early to mid-20s, who is beginning, as it were, what I like to call the cynical evolution. Because here's the thing, if you're young enough, it's possible that many bad things have happened to you when you're young. I mean, there are plenty of miserable lives that start at age 0 going forward. I'm not claiming the opposite. But if you had a decent life, more or less, if you're only 23, 24, 25, it's unlikely that the worst things have befallen you. But little things pile up cumulatively. And then you start asking questions. Why are things like this? Why do people behave this way? If you accumulate enough betrayals, enough disappointments, enough people dying around you, falling ill, losing your own health, for example, and having to live with a condition, well, at some point in time, it's going to be, like I said, either the mind of a madman or tremendous resilience, maybe belief in some deity, who knows? But generally speaking, you're going to crumble and you're going to be a little bit more cynical than would be expected, or at least is expected of you. In this world, it's as I suggested in the title, you're going to be optimistic and you're going to like it. Now, I've been over the reasons for this before. People don't like negativity because it brings them down, blah, blah, blah. There's also, of course, a financial and or socioeconomic incentive behind it, because again, negativity doesn't sell as well. Although arguably it does, because we do have a negativity bias, but that's a separate issue. And I can tell you one thing. I encountered this many, many moons ago with my late mother. And I remember being relatively young and basically telling her a bunch of things that had happened to me. None of them were positive. Now, you'd assume, this being my mother, that the reception would have been at least neutral, compassionate, understanding, concerned. Nope. Instead, I got screamed at. Instead, I was told to not talk to her about these things unless I have good news, or to not talk to her in general unless I have positive things to say. And I learned this lesson early on, because even though technically your mother is not supposed to behave that way to her own offspring, a lot of mothers do, obviously, but it was a good proxy, because I learned very early on that in general, people don't want to hear about the bad things that happen to you, whether they're your friends or not. If they're your friends and they hear the bad stuff, there's a very good chance they might disappear and no longer be your friend. Now, you might say those are fair weather friends, and I would agree, but unfortunately, that's the majority of people. Because I would argue that staying quote-unquote optimistic and not catastrophizing when life is throwing piles of cow dung at you left and right is an incredible feat indeed. If anyone can manage it, like I said, they're either religious, insane, or have some strange genetic condition. And here's the fundamental problem, right? When you're getting cow dung thrown at you nonstop for a prolonged period of time, months, years, etc., there is no way to really reset the balance if you think about it. And that's where the phrase "no news is good news" comes into play. You're so used to all the bad things happening that the only thing you can hope for is basically neutral news, or even better, no news. Because if the news is going to arrive, there's a high probability that it's going to be negative. The problem is with the balance, right? And this goes back to the Matthew effect. If the majority of things happening, you say, in the last 2 or 3 years have been ultra negative, and there's one bit of neutral news, or maybe 2 bits of neutral news, that's not going to offset the balance or the difference. Obviously not. And yet, time and again, I hear people say, look, something good did happen. Good in the sense of maybe the IRS doesn't want even more money from you, or maybe this illness won't kill you, but it might cripple you, this sort of thing, right? So they're basically very, very minor changes that aren't changes at all. Because I've said this before, when the overall balance of the Matthew effect has been negative for almost all of your life or a prolonged period of time, the amount of positive things that would be required to occur to offset that and to rewire your brain chemistry effectively in the opposite direction is just incredible, right? And there's no real way to organize that. There's not something you can plan for. It's not something you can set in motion. Sure, you can try things. You can make an effort to do certain things and put certain things into action such that better things happen to you. But even there, it's really, really tough. Again, at the end of the day, it's just luck. The never-ending chain concatenation of the good, the bad, all mixed up. And some people, through a combination of genes and otherwise fortuitous environment, get a lot of luck, and some people get none, with everything in between. But I think what's so important to understand at the end of the day, and this is ultimately what turns people into cynics, and why it's so much more difficult when you're older. I'll give you an example. My father used to be the most optimistic person I knew. Maybe not the most optimistic, but a very optimistic person. He's not that anymore. In fact, he's fairly bitter. He's disappointed by humanity, etc., etc. This is a guy pushing 90, by the way, who's pretty damn resilient, I would say, overall. But the point I'm trying to drive home here is that it's almost impossible to escape unscathed unless most of the things that happen are just positive. Then the balance, even when negative things happen, can still sway in a positive direction, because the expectation and even the inclination to quote-unquote catastrophize might not be there, right? But generally speaking, negative, deleterious things that have been going on for far too long and ongoing to a degree that you can't even remember the last time, it's been years, something nice happened to you. No, I'm not talking about not getting that letter from the IRS or hearing that you're not going to drop dead of illness. I mean, genuinely positive news. If that's been like a Bigfoot sighting in your life, well, good luck with that. And unfortunately, this would all be, I guess, okay-ish if people that were close to you didn't push you and tell you to always be positive and not be so negative. Because here's the other thing before I close this up. There's this mistaken belief that positive thoughts create positive results and actions, and negative thoughts create negative results and actions. But if you actually look at research and just also observe life, they're pretty uncorrelated. There are some vague correlations between kind of overall contentment and what have you, but in terms of good things happening to people, whether Joe Blow gets cancer or not, it has nothing to do with being positive or negative, whether a person is skilled at something. I've known incredibly negative people that were brilliant and could do their work really well. They weren't positive about anything. And I've also known very positive people that were always rooting for the best and this and that, and they were completely talentless and incapable. And so, yeah, thinking positive things does not result in positive results necessarily, nor does thinking negative things necessarily result in negative results. It's a big mess, and we are stuck in it. Anyway, as always, thank you for tuning in. Many special thanks to my very generous patrons on Patreon and my generous donors on PayPal. You guys are the best. Without you, this channel absolutely could not exist. Thank you so much for your continued support. And if you can engage in the usual YouTube jazz of liking the video, leaving a comment, subbing if you're not yet a sub, sharing the video, be much appreciated. I'm still alive. I'll check you out then. Until then, may the gods truly watch over you. Bye-bye for now.
If you liked this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you enjoy my content, please consider making a donation or becoming a patron. Thanks for watching.